Hello, I'm John Molesky, and this is Wilson Center Now, a production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. My guest today is Merissa Khurma. Merissa is director of the Wilson Center's Middle East program. She joins us to talk about the latest developments around the conflicts in the Middle East. Merissa, welcome back. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, John.
So this morning, Merissa, the UN describes the situation in northern Gaza as desperate. It's delivering the first food it's been able to get into the area in more than 2 weeks. About 400,000 Palestinians remain in that area. Speaks for itself to some degree, but tell us, how dire is this situation?
I mean, the situation has been, worsening for some time, and we maybe over the course of the last year have seen just a few weeks here and there of improvements of food deliveries. But where we stand today, and a large part of this is also due to the fact that there's so much attention being focused on the war in Lebanon, that less attention has gone to what is happening in Gaza. But the Israeli military has gone back in with various strikes in the northern part of Gaza. And that is one of the main reasons why we're not seeing any deliveries in the northern part in particular. But according to various data that has been collected by and verified by UN agencies, the entire population of Gaza is at risk. You have different populations that different people that have been displaced in various parts of the Gaza Strip. And so the severity of their situation differs, but all in all, pretty much the entire population of Gaza is at risk, or basically are experiencing some level of food insecurity. And this is not a situation that can be sustained for another few months or another year. So it is dire, and I think the international community, but particularly the United States, which has the most leverage when it comes to its key partner, Israel, in the region, has to use all of its different levers in order to ensure that the innocent civilians are taken care of, that food delivery trucks are being allowed in.
About this notion that about U.S. leverage, some would argue that we're finding out how little leverage that we have over Benjamin Netanyahu. Or is it more a case that we haven't exercised the full leverage that is available to us?
I think both sides of the story have some truth to them. I think firstly, this is a situation that has unfolded over the last year at various levels. So you've seen U.S. Exercise various levels of pressure throughout. But one thing we know for sure is that, private as well as public statements to Prime Minister Netanyahu that would add more pressure on Israel to act, or that would critique Israel's military strategy and the way that they have been going about things, both in Gaza and Lebanon, do not work. And so from this standpoint, I think the entire world is watching, and particularly people across the region, and they basically see the US to be less influential and less credible as a result, and at best complicit in what is happening. And I think that is the most dangerous, consequence of this lack of movement or on the part of the U.S. government to exercise pressure where needed. So we will have to see at the next milestone if, for example, with regards to the strike against Iran, if U.S. advice will be heeded or not. But so far, it doesn't look like the United States has used all of its levers. And there are different considerations that are part of that calculus. But of course, Prime Minister Netanyahu is very much aware of these considerations, and so that plays to his advantage.
Yeah, I guess you're talking about the politics in the U.S., domestic politics. Election cycle makes it difficult to get clarity on any of these things. So
Exactly.
in Lebanon, UN peacekeepers are in place.
Mhm.
Israel has repeatedly asked them to move, but they're refusing to do so. What does that situation look like? And this seems like a second front where Israel finds itself at odds with the United Nations.
This is a very dangerous precedent to set. The UN peacekeepers have to be respected. Their mandate has to be respected. And yes, the Israeli Prime Minister sent a direct message to UN Secretary General in order to have UNIFIL move for the Israelis to deepen their military incursions into Lebanon. But that, again, that's a very dangerous precedent to set in the international community and further undermines the United Nations and undermines all the UN Security Council resolutions that will be key if implemented, especially that the US backs all of them with regards to Lebanon, to basically withdraw, to demarcate the border, and to disarm Hezbollah. So this is again a very dangerous precedent, and I think messages like this to the Secretary General are not going to move a needle on this. The mandate of UNIFIL is one that was set by the UN Security Council, and that includes the United States as a permanent member. So I think that there has to be some pushback on that, and a reaffirmation of the importance of their role in Lebanon, as well as the importance of upholding and respecting the various UN Security Council resolutions when it comes to Lebanon and Israel.
Marissa, the phrase "the fog of war" certainly looms large in a situation like this. We have Israel Defense Forces claiming that Hezbollah is using ambulances to move fighters and other things, weapons around in southern Lebanon. An Israeli spokesperson has threatened that they're going to attack vehicles that they believe are transporting such materials or such personnel, regardless of its type, is the exact quote. How do we find out exactly what's happening in a circumstance like this? Where is the best information? Should we just believe Israel's intelligence is rock solid in this regard? Should we believe the denials? How do we begin to sort it out?
It's very difficult to believe that every single ambulance is, that is moving from one place to another in Lebanon or in Gaza for that matter are carrying fighters. Now, does Hamas and Hezbollah have they prioritized their people? Absolutely not, and that has to be a reminder to all of us. But Israel also has to make those calculations in a more precise manner because so far what we're seeing are innocent civilians being targeted and killed instead, and the essential health infrastructure, whether it's in Gaza or in Lebanon, has been completely decimated, particularly when it comes to Gaza. But we're also seeing the same thing happening in Lebanon, and we're seeing the death toll, and we're seeing women and children and elderly and innocent civilians being pulled out of the rubble. And that has to be how we assess what is going on. So we cannot just take these assessments at face value, and intelligence is never 100% accurate. But it seems that there is very little regard to human life in Lebanon or in Gaza when it comes to these so-called targeted attacks.
Let me attempt in this horrific news to interject what was slightly some good news this week. Nearly 93,000 children receiving a polio vaccine in Gaza. And
Mhm.
this was a moment where it seemed as if both sides were willing to at least not affect a complete ceasefire, but slow things down to a point where it was possible to get to these children. Talk about this health crisis and this potential outbreak of polio and just ladling more and more difficulty on top of what is already a horrific situation.
I mean, we didn't, the polio outbreak didn't happen in a vacuum. This is the result of decimating the health infrastructure, targeting health workers. I mean, we just recently heard from over 60 health workers and doctors from various countries that have given their assessment of what they have seen on the ground. And this was published, I think, in the New York Times. And what they have witnessed is absolutely horrific in the emergency rooms or the makeshift health centers that have been set up in Gaza. So the situation is absolutely horrific. And so in these conditions where there are no clean, hygienic, or safe places to be sheltered and to be taken care of, and where UN personnel and other international organizations that are on the ground are also being targeted and killed as a result of Israeli strikes. It is bound to happen. It's not just, I mean, polio is the most extreme, of course, but other diseases have also taken hold. I've spoken with officials at the International Rescue Committee a few months ago, and that was just a few months ago, where we hadn't even seen the first polio outbreak yet, but they were listing a number of other health risks as well as diseases that they have been picking up on from the data coming from the field. And so this is an impossible situation for any population to endure. And just a reminder, we just marked the 1 year anniversary of the horrific Hamas attacks that took place, 1 year of a very brutal and relentless war that Israel has waged in Gaza. So this situation is unsustainable. I mean, how can you think about what the day after looks like at this point when we are unable to even address the current situation? But yes, the polio vaccines, that is a drop in the ocean of what has to be addressed in Gaza. It is a good example of how things can work out. And that goes back to the original, conversation we had about the need for the United States to exercise all of its different, or use all of its different tools in the foreign policy toolbox to ensure that people are not harmed. And that's the least that the United States and other members of the international community can do. But it seems that in the international, humanitarian sector, a lot of these organizations have been screaming loudly about how this humanitarian crisis back in January was just going to get worse. And look at where we are today. The war continues. We haven't seen a ceasefire or a hostage deal in place. It doesn't seem even that this is a priority anymore, because now Israel is waging a war against Hezbollah in Lebanon, a war that the Lebanese people did not choose, that Hezbollah pretty much made that decision on their behalf on October 8th. But those who are suffering, both in Gaza and in Lebanon, are the innocent civilians. And that is a message that we have to amplify.
Speaking of amplifying voices, tell us about the work that you and the Middle East program have been doing to introduce more voices into the equation. We talked about the fog of war and how difficult it is to get reliable information and know exactly what to believe. And of course, you were talking about the U.S. and Israel having a strong alliance, a strong relationship, diplomatic ties, the kind that the U.S. obviously doesn't have with Hezbollah or Hamas or organizations like that. So we tend to see it from a certain perspective, but there are a lot of other people in the region, not just within these countries, who are affected and who have the same concerns that all of us have about the potential for this even escalating into something deadlier for a larger group of people. So tell our viewers and listeners about the work you've been doing, and what are some of the things that are out there that people have been saying.
Well, as you know, John, the Wilson Center is committed, through its mandate to independent research and analysis. And I think our role, specifically in the Middle East program during these trying times, is to stay true to that mandate. But being dispassionate analysts does not mean that we also lose complete sight of what is happening on the ground. to the innocent civilians, and therefore highlighting the humanitarian catastrophe that is unfolding in the region is critical. It's also highly important to ensure that there are diverse voices that are providing the analysis and providing different perspectives. And we are fortunate to have a very wide and diverse network of fellows and former fellows, and we're currently working on ensuring that we have more fellows with expertise on Arab-Israeli issues, so that we are getting various perspectives in there, various points of analysis that look at how, as you mentioned in your question, how different people are viewing the situation on the ground and how different people are reacting to the war. I think, as a native Arabic speaker, I have the privilege to look at the news and read the news across the region in Arabic, but also look at Western media, whether it's from the wire services or US newspapers. And the good thing about Arab media is that they're very quick at picking up what the Hebrew press is saying. And so I get to check that out as well. And I can tell you that in some instances, it feels like, people in the West and people in the region are almost watching a different war unfold. And I think this has been very clear, particularly when you zoom into how the Israeli media, TV in particular, has been covering Gaza, where people are unaware of the extent of the human suffering, and even Israeli journalists themselves are saying that they're not covering that enough, and the focus is almost entirely on what the Israeli military is achieving. And on the other hand, when you look at Arab media, be it Al Jazeera, Al Arabiya, or even the local news channels that are still operating in the 22 Arab countries, you are pretty much watching scenes from Gaza, from Lebanon, interviews with people who have been displaced. And of course, in Gaza, 9 out of 10 people have been displaced at least once or twice. In Lebanon, the number of those who have been displaced so far surpasses 1 million. And that also includes Syrian refugees who had already fled the brutal civil war and the Assad regime from Syria to find safe refuge in Lebanon. And so that is what people are watching. And I think that is what is influencing public opinion, to a large degree in both locales.
And I should also mention, maybe you did, but just so our viewers and listeners catch it, that a lot of the people you're talking about who are providing this analysis and these viewpoints are in the region. They're actually on the ground.
Yes, there are many people who are in the region, writing from Lebanon, from Jerusalem, from Tel Aviv, and various parts of the region, and others, of course, from Amman, Jordan, and others, of course, with expertise in the U.S., which is also an essential point of view to highlight.
For those who are interested, is this in form of essays or videos on your website? Is that where people could find it?
Yes, we've throughout the past year, we've had different blogs and op-eds that have been published. We've also had a video series that included interviews with people from the region, as well as here in the United States, from the humanitarian sector, for example, to highlight the humanitarian crisis, from international legal experts to look at the international legal issues that are associated with the war in Gaza in particular, because, as you know, there have been various cases, one at the ICC and two at the International Court of Justice against Israel. And so we've really tried to look at all the different aspects of it. And that is, again, perhaps a drop in the bucket in the policymaking circles, because there's certainly a lot emerging from the region and things are shifting very, very quickly. But I think, again, going back to my earlier point, it's essential that we do that. And dispassionate analysis does not mean that we just sit back and not highlight the human side of the story, which is pretty much right now at the center of what is happening.
Well, you're being modest, but I could say it's a terrific body of work, and it really does help
Thank
people
you.
get a broader perspective and dig deeper. And if you're interested, if you come to the Wilson Center website, wilsoncenter.org, at the top of the page, you'll see a programs tab. If you click on that, you'll be able to find the Middle East program and all of the things that Merissa and I have just been talking about. Merissa, you've been on the circuit. Busy would be an understatement, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people are interested, and you've been providing a lot of analysis to us and to others. It seems like we're miles and miles away from a couple of weeks ago where we were talking hopefully about the potential for a ceasefire. So I just want to ask you now, as a final thought before we close this discussion, because it won't be our last, in terms of maybe your best hope or your greatest fear based on where we sit right now, what do you anticipate in both sides of that coin?
I think the worst fear is not just my own worst fear. I think that's a fear that people in the region, in Israel and Lebanon, and the Palestinian territories, and especially neighboring countries as well as Iran, are fearing, which is continuation of this direct war between Israel and Iran, and spillover all across the region, which is very possible, particularly given Israel's reach, and given where all the different militias and proxies that Iran supports are located, be it Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and of course, the crown jewel, Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza. And so we're just going to see the worst case scenario looks like a more intense regional war where more people will be impacted. And I think, the greatest hope is that diplomacy continues, and I know that this administration, the Biden administration has been basically going at it nonstop. But it's important at this point to recognize where we're at, where we were last year, or even early January, where all of us were talking about some sort of ceasefire proposal that both Hamas and Israel had agreed to, or at least in principle, and military operations winding down in Gaza. And look at where we are today. All of us who have been working on this for the last year were very much worried about this worst case scenario unfolding, and we're very, very close to that. And I think, we can no longer say we need to avert a regional war, because I think we are there. But how worse will it get is, I think, where all the fear and anxiety is. The greatest hope right now, again, is for diplomacy to continue, for ceasefire proposals to move forward, and for those who have been speaking up against this war, on behalf of the hostages and their families that have been protesting nonstop in Israel, and others, across the region who also want the bombings and the strikes to just stop. Those are the ones who want to return to their homes, if their homes are, there, whether it's in Gaza or Lebanon. And similarly in Israel, in the northern part, where over 75,000 people have been displaced. So again, it's the hope is to see diplomacy and some sort of political process reigning in, and stopping the conflict.
Well, it's often difficult to find hope in dark times, but we have to keep on trying, right? Keep hope alive, keep on believing that diplomacy can work, because the alternative is not acceptable. Thank you. One way that we get there is deeper understanding, and your work continues to contribute to that. So thanks, Merissa, for today and for your ongoing efforts.
Thank you so much.
Our guest has been Merissa Khurma, the director of the Middle East program at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. We hope you enjoyed this edition of Wilson Center Now, and that you'll join us again soon. Until then, for all of us at the center, I'm John Molesky. Thanks for your time and interest.